Sony has pulled the plug on yet another game. This time it's Project H, which was widely believed to be a Horizon Zero Dawn MMO. According to reports from South Korean news outlet MTN, the project, also known as Skyline, was cancelled late last year. However, the development team was only officially informed this month. The team has since been disbanded and reassigned to other projects. So, what exactly was Project 8? Back in 2023, NCSoft and Sony announced a partnership aimed at expanding PlayStation's reach beyond console. Rumors quickly surfaced that NCSoft was working on a Horizon-themed MMO, with some sources claiming it was meant to be a major collaboration between the two companies. The project even had a logo that matched Horizon's iconic font. Sony has reportedly sunk about $5 billion into these live service projects, most of which have failed spectacularly. This includes games like Concord, a project so hyped internally it was called the future of PlayStation, which flopped so hard it lasted less than 2 weeks. Then there's Fair Game, Marathon, and the Horizon multiplayer game, all still in development but under immense pressure to justify their existence. Here's the thing though, this plan was insane. The live service market is already oversaturated. People don't have the time or money to keep up with so many live service games all at once. Each one demands so much time, it's like taking on a part-time job. Sony somehow thought flooding the market with a dozen live service games in a few years was a good idea. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. By November 20th, 23, the cracks in their plan were showing. Sony quietly halved their goal from 12 games to just 6. Fast forward to now, and we're hearing about even more cancellations. Investigative journalist Jason Schreier recently reported that 2 more live service projects got axed. One was being developed by Ben's studio, who made Days Gone, and the other was from Bluepoint Games, the studio behind the Demon's Souls remake. Let's look at how many live service projects Sony has canceled recently. There's Concord, which technically launched, but was shut down just 2 weeks later, with refunds issued to everyone. Then you've got the God of War live service game, The Last of Us multiplayer game, Spider-Man 2 multiplayer game, Twisted Metal live service project, Bend Studios multiplayer game, London Studios co-op game, which also led to the studio shutting down entirely, and Bungie's Payback, which was supposed to be a third-person Destiny spin-off. That's 9 canceled live service games in roughly a year. Honestly, this failure was predictable. Sony set an unrealistic goal of launching 12 live service games in 5 years. Live service games are incredibly risky, and most of them fail. Just look at Anthem, Marvel's Avengers Redfall, or Suicide Squad. Kill the Justice League. You can't just take studios that specialize in single-player games and force them to make live service projects. It's a completely different skill set and requires years of experience to get right. Even Shuhei Yoshida, former head of Sony Worldwide Studios, admitted as much in a recent interview. He said Sony executives knew the risk, but gave studios the resources to try anyway. While some like Helldivers 2 found success, others like Concord crashed and burned. Here's another layer to the mess. Margins. Sony has been public about the fact that the PlayStation 5 generation is supposed to be a financial powerhouse, operating at a 20% margin. But due to the mismanagement of these live service projects, their margins are hovering around 6% and possibly even lower after the cancellations and write-offs. This is a huge problem, and investors aren't happy. Sony's new president, Hiroki Totoki, has been vocal about prioritizing profitability and margins moving forward. That means fewer risky projects, more ports to platforms like PC and the Nintendo Switch 2, and likely a bigger focus on established franchises that are guaranteed moneymakers. This financial tightening has another consequence: the death of new IP. New franchises are already rare in today's industry because of how expensive games are to make. Now, with Sony doubling down on sequels, remakes, and remasters, we're likely to see even fewer risks being taken. Studios like Naughty Dog and Santa Monica Studio may still get to experiment because of their track record, but for smaller teams or newer studios, forget it. Even when new IPs do get greenlit, they'll be under intense scrutiny. Look at Fair Game. It's a new IP, but it's already struggling to generate buzz, and the odds are stacked against it. This is a direct result of Sony's mismanagement. They've burned so much goodwill and money-chasing trends that even their promising projects are being met with skepticism. Then there's Horizon. Sony seems obsessed with turning this franchise into a multimedia empire. Between the rumored MMO from NCSoft, the multiplayer game from Guerrilla Games, and even a Horizon movie in the works, they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. But as good as the Horizon games are, they've never quite reached the cultural relevance Sony seems to think they have. Launching them against juggernauts like Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring hasn't helped, and it's hard to imagine a Horizon multiplayer game going head-to-head with Monster Hunter and coming out on top. So, where does all of this leave PlayStation? Right now, they're at a crossroads. They can either double down on their current strategy, pouring more resources into live service games and hoping for a a hit, or they can pivot back to what made them great: single-player, narrative-driven experiences. There are signs that a shift might already be happening. Canceling these live service projects could be an acknowledgement that the strategy isn't working, but if they go too far in the other direction and focus exclusively on remakes and remasters, they risk alienating fans who want new and exciting experiences. What's ironic here is that Xbox, long seen as the underdog, might actually be better positioned right now. They've been quietly building a pipeline of ambitious new IPs, reboots of old franchises, and innovative projects. Meanwhile, Sony, the market leader, feels stuck in a rut, relying too heavily on nostalgia and trend rather than charting a clear path forward. If Sony doesn't course correct soon, they risk falling behind. Their financials are shaky, their leadership is under scrutiny, and their audience is losing patience. Whether 2025 marks the beginning of a new era for PlayStation or the continuation of its decline depends on the decisions they make now. Modern games are basically massive productions. You've got huge teams, cutting-edge tech, years of development time, and sky-high marketing costs. Take GTA 6, for example. Its development budget is rumored to be between $1 billion and $2 billion. That's more than the GDP of some small countries. The reason these budgets are so insane is that studios aren't just making a game. They're building world, adding lifelike animation, complex AI, massive voiceover casts, and marketing campaigns that dominate social media for months. And then there's the live service component. Even if a game is primarily single-player, studios often invest heavily in multiplayer modes or additional content to keep players engaged and spending long after launch. This brings us to the idea of $100 games. There's a growing sentiment in the industry, especially among analysts and publishers, that $70 might not cut it anymore. If games are going to cost billions to make, then publishers need to recoup those costs somehow. GTA 6 could be the first test case for this, with many speculating that Rockstar might price it at $100 for the standard edition. And here's the thing, GTA 6 is probably the only game that could get away with this. It's one of the most anticipated games in history, and millions of people would still buy it, no matter the price. But if Rockstar sets this precedent, other publishers might try to follow suit. That's where it gets dicey. The difference is that not every game can justify a $100 price tag. For every GTA 6, there's a Forspoken or a Marvel's Avengers, games that flop despite huge budgets and marketing pushes. Imagine shelling out $100 for one of those duds. Players won't just be mad, they'll stop trusting publishers entirely. Now, let's address the elephant in the room: greed. It's easy to see the push for $100 games or the rise of live service models as pure greed. And in some cases, it absolutely is, especially when it comes to predatory practices like overpriced microtransactions, loot boxes, and battle passes. But there's another side to this. For some games, like GTA 6, these additional revenue streams aren't just about making more money, they're about breaking even. If a studio is spending $2 billion to make a game, they have to find ways to generate recurring revenue. That's why live service elements like GTA Online or Call of Duty's Warzone have become so common. It's not just greed, it's survival. That said, there's a line between smart business and exploitation. When studios start designing games around monetization instead of player enjoyment, that's when players push back. The backlash against Battlefront 2's loot boxes or Call of Duty's pay-to-win mechanics shows that players aren't afraid to speak up when companies cross the line. Sony's live service strategy fits squarely into this conversation. They're chasing recurring revenue because they see it as essential to funding their future projects, but their execution has been terrible. They've dumped billions into live service experiments with little to show for it, and now they're stuck trying to figure out how to recover. The cancellations we talked about earlier might be a sign that Sony's rethinking its approach, but it's just as likely they'll double down on safer bets, like remakes, sequels, and ports. That's where the push for $100 games could come in. If Sony can't make live service work, they might try to justify higher prices for their single-player hits instead. So, where does this leave us? If $100 games become the norm, it's going to fundamentally change the way players interact with the industry. On one hand, it might push studios to focus on quality. If you're asking players to pay that much, you can't afford to release a buggy or incomplete game. On the other hand, it could also price a lot of people out of gaming altogether, especially if every major release costs that much. And let's not forget the growing trend of deluxe and collector's edition. These already cost $100, $150, or even more, often with digital perks like early access or in-game currency. If $100 becomes the baseline, does that mean these premium editions start hitting $200? Where does it end? The gaming industry is at a tipping point. Budgets are climbing, players are getting frustrated with greedy practices, and publishers are scrambling to figure out how to keep making money without alienating their audience. Sony, in particular, is a microcosm of these challenges. They've got some of the best studios and franchises in the world, but their leadership's obsession with live service games has put them in a tough spot. What happens next depends on whether publishers, including Sony, can strike the right balance. If they don't, we could see a repeat of the industry crash in the early 80s, when too many bad business decisions led to a massive downturn. Or maybe they'll figure it out and usher in a new era of smarter, more sustainable gaming. Ready to dive into how other companies like Microsoft and Rockstar are navigating these same challenges? Let's keep rolling.